Hey, welcome to Maya Acting 5, Lip Sync Dialogue and Gestures. So open up your file from last class with the lip sync already animated. We'll use the lip sync for this class, but you can delete the rest of the animation, which we'll do together in a few minutes. So in today's session, we'll be giving the character some main gestures with some subtle accenting, sprinkled in between and around the gestures. Remember, it's lip sync first, then body animation, then the facial animation. So since our lip sync is already done, we'll just move on to the body animation, and then we'll do some facial. This one can be part of your demo reel, so let's get it looking really nice. You can also go back later and refine it further. Alright, so we're going to be going for something like this. Now remember, this is my interpretation of the dialogue. I'd like you guys to come up with your own poses, your own gestures, and accents, and just your own take on it.
Everyone sign? Yes. Good. On we go.
Okay, so we'll just do a quick breakdown of this. So this is my initial pose. Now for everyone signed.
Everyone sign?
But I added an accent for everyone. See the head there? Everyone. So this is my anticipation pose. And then this is the next major key pose for signed. And it happens right on the, as we were talking about in last class, you want to have the major poses hit the vowels on the most pronounced words. So the first one is signed.
Everyone sign?
So the arms go out right on the I in signed. So far we have one key pose, second key pose for anticipation, and then our third key pose for signed.
Yes. Good.
And then he anticipates before he goes into the yes. A little anticipation downward. He goes into his next key pose right on the E in yes.
Yes.
We want to keep it nice and crisp like that too at some points.
Yes. Good.
Okay, so yes. And then on good, it's just an accent. So he stays in the same key pose. He accented on the word good. And again, we always do it on the vowel, so I try to get the head to reach its final destination right on the O in good.
Good. On we go.
And then we anticipate it again. Next key pose is this anticipation pose. And then we're going to go to the next main key pose on the O in the word on.
On we go.
Through all these poses, in between all of these poses, you want to make sure you're getting these nice arcs. If you follow the top of his head through this motion, you'll see that it arcs down and the arms arc. There's a lot of arcing going on, so we can get that by setting another key pose in the middle here. We'll just scrub back and forth. You can see that arcing motion. Now you can use your eyes and just follow along with his elbows and his wrists and his head, and everything's going in an arcing motion here.
On we go.
And then there's a little accent on the end for go.
On we go.
So if you put it all together.
Everyone sign? Yes. Good. On we go.
So you have to decide where your main poses are going to go and your accents. Alright, so let's just take a look at the rig. Let's unhide the body for our camera view, set it to textures, and then we'll just keep it on 5 for our perspective view. We've already used the head quite a bit, and you've seen the head and neck controls and the face controls. So let's take a look at the rest of the rig. I'm just going to shut off the stage. So just like the mannequin, we have these clavicle controls. And again, you want to go easy with those. There's some points at which they will the shirt will intersect the body. So usually I'm just using them for some up and down motion. It's just to get some shrug. You can also rotate them in Z a little bit. Alright, and next we have the shoulder. And just like the mannequin, on the shoulder control we have an IK-FK switch. So the IK gives you, the elbow and the wrist controls. Same as the mannequin and the hand controls. It's set up the same way. This character has a forearm twist, which comes in handy. Yeah, we get the IK-FK switch. Translates and rotates, and we have an elbow pull vector, so you can aim the elbow. So that's on each arm. And then we have the spine controls, which you can select all together and rotate those. And they rotate together nicely. And then of course you can do one at a time if you need to. So we have a root. This works the same as the mannequin. And we have a pelvis control. Our knee pull vectors. And the legs are obviously just the same as the mannequin. The legs are all IK. And then the feet operate pretty much the same way as well. There's a roll on there. And we have a toe flap. And then we have our move control, which the pivot is in the center, so if you want to get him to flip around or something like that, you can move him that way. And just to translate them across stage, we're going to use the pause. I'm going to call it the pause node, but it's a position. The fingers are exactly the same as the mannequin. Alright, so let's get rid of our the animation that we've done on our character so far. First thing you're going to want to do is create a button for this guy. So what I'd usually do, because we do face animation last, I'll leave the facial controls out of the button that we use for posing the character for the acting. So the eye controls and the face controls and the mouth control I would not include in your button. So this is my button here. I have a man and a woman button. So we're working with the man right now. So if I select my button, you'll see that the eyes, mouth, and face are not included inside the selection. Alright, so once I've selected those controls, you can see all the keys on the timeline that we set last class. Okay, so these are all for the head and neck if you animated the neck at all. So let's just delete all those. You can just shift to drag over that and right click and delete. And then we'll just set these values to 0. Just so everything's zeroed out. But we still have the facial animation. I'm going to actually get rid of that facial animation too. So I'm just going to select all the eye controls. We're going to leave the lip sync, but just select the face. And let's just delete all that as well. And then we'll select all the face controls. Just drag over everything and zero it out. So all we should have, and we'll just zero out the eye control by selecting all those. 0. Just set everything back to 0 and no animation on it. So all we should have is the character speaking. Turn our sound on.
Everyone signed? Yes. Good. On we go.
Okay. It's a good idea to plan out your animation. Even professional animators out there still plan their poses on a board or on paper. Just thumbnail them out. Especially if you are new to animation and you don't have a lot of experience with character acting, then I suggest you definitely go ahead and storyboard it. So you can download the storyboard from our website. I'm just going to open it up with Paint, Microsoft Paint. But you can do it in Photoshop. That way you can create a new layer to do your drawings on top of the storyboard. So you don't draw right on this board. That way you can edit your drawings after. But I'm just going to use, just for speed right now, I'm going to use Microsoft Paint just to demonstrate. Okay, so I'll just go with the brush tool. Okay, so what you want to do is just play your dialogue, listen to it, and then think about what pose you want him to go into on what words.
Everyone signed? Yes. Good. On we go.
So listen to it, you can close your eyes and just think about what you want his body to do on the first, say on the first word. So first thing you got to do is identify where the vowels are, or where the most pronounced words are, and then find the vowel. So
everyone signed?
So signed would be the first one. Everyone signed. And then we'll just do a drawing for that. I would write in here the actual words. And then go ahead and start doing the drawings. So actually you might even choose to put in your initial pose first. So we're animating this with a medium shot, which is just a waist up sort of shot. So you might just have his medium pose, something like this. Again, it's not going to be stellar drawing with the mouse. And then he goes into everyone signed. At this point, you could listen to the audio again and just think about the next thing you might want him to do.
Everyone signed? Yes.
Yes. So normally I wouldn't storyboard in the accents. You can, if you want to do a real detailed storyboard, you can do accents as well. For the next pose on mine, I just went with yes for the next main pose.
Good. On we go.
Alright, so I think you get the idea. You really have to think about what words you're going to pose on, and it's really a matter of identifying where the most pronounced dialogue words are, so you know where to put your big poses. And when you start animating, you really want to time it right on the vowel of the most pronounced dialogues. And also when you accent, you want to hit the vowel as well. So you have to choose which words in the dialogue that you're going to move your character on. Alright, so the first thing we should do here is reframe our camera. So let's open up our outliner and just select our camera pause. We'll reframe this into a medium shot. So medium shot is just basically waist up. I'm not going to key the camera. We'll just place it like this for now, and then we can adjust it later if we need to. So something like that. Alright, so if you have your poses planned, let's get him into his initial pose. Alright, so let's just say this is our initial pose. So we'll go to the button that we created for this guy and key that. Now again, you can expand your timeline to a scale that's comfortable for you. And then we'll just, the way I usually go about animating, once they're in their initial pose, I'll just key that, and then I'll play the audio again, just listen to it, and just think about what pose I want them to go into first. But you may have already taken care of this with your planning. We're going to do this the same way we did all the body mechanics exercises. We're just going to block it first. We're going to set all of our poses, however many frames apart, and then we'll adjust the timing, play blast it, adjust the timing. Once we're happy with all that, then we will go into the graph editor and refine it. So I'm just going to bring my graph editor down. We don't really need to look at it right now.
Everyone sign?
You want to scrub through and find the vowel in the dialogue. And there's the E in everyone. And what I'll usually do is very similar to some stuff we did in the last class. We'll just key it right on that vowel. That key frame is really just to mark on the timeline where the vowel is. But I am going to move them there too. So I say I might go 2 or 3 frames, and we're just going to key the whole character because we might move some of the other parts later when we go to refine it. Right, so I put a marker on the E in everyone on the timeline here. Then I'm going to back 3 frames and just set a key, or 2 or 3 frames, set a key. Now I'm going to go back to where the vowel is said and actually move the head down a little bit. And just, however you want your accent to be. And then press S on your keyboard and just key it. Now if we scrub over, so there's a nice little accent there. I've already decided that I want to pose them on the signed. So we have to find the vowel in that word, and the vowel is I in signed. So we scrub through where we hear it, and it's right on frame 16 in this case, so I'll hit S on my keyboard to place a key there. And again, that's just to mark where the pose is going to hit. Now I have to decide for the pose that he's going to go into, how long do I want it to take? Let's say 6 frames. So I'll just go back 6 frames, 6 or 5 frames, however many frames I decide that's going to happen in, and set another key. And then I'll go back to the key where the vowel takes place, and I'll actually pose them there. So now I'll set my pose for the dialogue signed. As we always did in the past classes, we're going to work with the center of the body first. Remember your silhouettes. Keep in mind your line of action and your shoulder tilts as well. These are just things you have to continuously think about as you're animating. Alright, so I'll go with this pose for signed, and we'll just key that. Okay, so now what I probably should do is add an anticipation pose in. So we'll go back to this frame here, and just go back maybe 3 or 4 frames, or however many frames you think the anticipation pose should take. We'll set another key, and now we have 3 keyframes here. We decided where the pose was first, and now we'll anticipate that action. So I'll grab my root control. He moves over towards screen left, so we'll actually on the anticipation we'll get him to move down and over to the right a little. And we can anticipate that action with his right arm out, extended. So we'll actually have it come in the opposite direction first. Just doing this quickly to demonstrate, but I expect you guys to spend a lot of time on each pose and really think it through. Okay, so maybe something like that. So we can step on our timeline here, anticipate, and then pose. See how we anticipated with the arm before it extends out. So if we scrub over that now, as I always do, we set a pose and scrub over it, see where you're at. So we have an accent, and then we have 2 main poses, or 2 key poses, which is an anticipation pose and then a gesture.
Yes.
So at this point, instead of putting him into another main pose, another big pose for yes, if you go into too many major poses, he ends up looking overposed, and he's just moving around too much. So it's really, that's why we use accents, to keep moving but not overposing him too much. It's part of why we use accents. So there's the E and yes. So I'll just set a key, just select this whole body and set a key, just to mark where the E and yes is, and then we'll go back. If I want yes to happen over 4 frames, I'll go back 4 frames and set another key. And then I'll go back to where the E is, and let's just accent his head a little bit. I might even turn his head at this point. You decide how you want your animation to play out. So I'll just set a key on there. I'll include with my blocking these things like, dipping the head for a turn. You want to get the blocking as close to the finished piece as possible. So do a really good blocking pass and just get as much in there as you can. Just make sure all the controls are keyed on one frame for each pose so that you can step from pose to pose. Each one of these keyframes has all the controls keyed on it on one frame. So you can think of each one as, if this was classical animation, you can think of each one of these frames with keys on it. Each one is a piece of paper with a drawing on it. So right now we just have a head turn, and we'll consider that an accent. Now everything else is really static. We can put moving holds on that in the refining stage. The most important thing right now is getting all the main posing and accenting in and getting the timing right. Okay, so the O in good, I'll just key his whole body on that. We'll just do a 3-frame accent. And I might even just move body parts even for an accent. Usually I'll keep the pose generally the same. And then you can cushion that. We can go down, a bunch of frames down the timeline, maybe 7 or 8. I'll even add cushions into my blocking. So just move it a tiny bit more, key the whole thing. This is one of the most pronounced words in this dialogue, so at this point I would go into a new pose, which is much different than this, but you would anticipate it first. So the workflow would basically be, you go to the O and on, set a key to mark it, go back however many frames you want him to take to get into that pose, mark that, and then go back to where the vowel is and on, and actually set your new pose. So I'm just doing this on the fly right now. I haven't really thought about how I want this to look, but I'm just demonstrating to you how the workflow goes. Don't forget, if you need to twist the arm, you can use that forearm control to help get it twisted all the way around. Okay, so say this is our next key pose on the vowel of the most pronounced dialogue words. And if this is a quick movement, say I want this to be a very fast movement, as you already know, you can slide the entire pose, you select the whole character, your button, and then you can shift select one of these keyframes which gets the entire pose, and you can bring them closer together for a quicker movement. If it's a fast movement, you want to overshoot it, so you would go a little bit past this pose and then come back to it for a nice overshoot, or if it's a slower movement, then you would cushion it. So at this point I got these 2 keys from one pose to the next. But I want to anticipate this next pose. So what I would do is just go back on the timeline a little bit, however many frames I want the anticipation to take place. And then on this keyframe in the middle, I would set the anticipation pose, and then he goes into this. Both of his arms are going to fly out towards screen right. We're going to move to the right, so we're going to move him to the left first. Okay, I don't even have the hands posed or anything like that. I'm just giving you the general idea here. Alright, so let's scrub over that. So now we have an anticipation from one pose to the next. And then I might overshoot that. So what I can do if I want to overshoot this, I'll just go down the timeline for as many frames as I want the overshoot to take place in, set a key to mark, and then go back to our actual pose and just move it forward a little bit. Just go a little bit past where the pose is. Key that. Now if we scrub over it, we have our anticipation. It overshoots here, and then it comes back to our original pose. Alright, so let's just take a look at what we've done so far. I'm just going to drag my range slider so I have all the keys just in my timeline here.
Everyone sign? Yes. Good. On we go.
So let's shut the sound off for a minute. Alright, so what we have here is his initial pose. Put a little accent in. Our first main pose on the dialogue vowel. Another little accent on a vowel. Another little accent on a vowel, and then anticipation and overshoot right on the vowel, and then settles back into his final pose. We put our main poses in there, our big poses in there, and then sort of sprinkle in some accents here and there. And you can mix and match it up however you like. This is the creative part of animation. The part I actually love the most is how am I going to piece this together? What poses are you going to use? All these kind of things. The timing. How fast is he going to move into these poses? Where am I going to overshoot? Where am I going to settle? Speaking of settle, when he goes into this pose, we overshot the last pose. So on this one it'd be kind of nice just to settle him. So we don't want to overshoot every pose, and we don't want to settle every pose. It's nice to have faster movements that overshoot, and it's nice to have some movements slower. It's a real contrast with the speed in the motion. And deciding where things will be fast or slow are going to come from when you listen to the dialogue. You kind of know when you listen to the dialogue where he should move quickly and where they should go into a pose slower and settle. So I think on this pose, because I already have an overshoot at the end, we'll settle here just to mix it up a bit, and also too because the dialogue sort of calls for it.
Everyone sign?
Over here he yells, so it makes more sense to have him be more aggressive and move quick.
Good. On we go.
Alright, so this pose here, when he goes into his first, everyone's signed. I'm going to go maybe 8 frames down the timeline, just set a key there, and that's going to be where he settles. So I'll go back to the actual, I could either move him forward a little bit at this point, right on this key where he settles, or I can move him back a little bit on the actual pose. So say I moved him back on this pose a little bit. I'm just going to do his root just to demonstrate for you, and I'll key that. If I scrub over it, I moved him back here, and he settles over like 8 frames or so here. And then we'll just do his head. And then we'll do his arm. You can just key those individually. Just make sure they're on. It's right on the frame where your pose is. Okay, so you can do that just by moving things back a little bit toward the previous pose. You can have it settle that way after the fact while you're blocking, or you can go to this pose and advance things in the direction that they were going. So you can just move it a little bit more this way. And that sort of thing, and then pose that. Now if you do that, you're going to have to copy this last frame, because he'll move over this time, because this was a hold. So if you advance him a little bit on that new keyframe you created for the cushion, you'll have to right click and copy on this frame like we've done before, and right click and paste here. Or an easy way to do that is to select all the controls first with your button, middle mouse button click over this frame, and then drag it over to the next frame you want to copy it to, release your mouse button, and then press S, and that'll just key it. That'll copy and paste for you. And then if we drag over here, we can see our hold is keeping still. When we refine, we'll do our moving holds at that point. Okay, so we'll just play blast that. We'll just do a check. I don't want to have it on save to file if I'm just checking. You do your final that way. As you're working along, you want to continue to play blast your work. You don't have to do it every time you set a pose, but definitely after you're done your blocking, I would play blast it. And since we're rendering from a render global settings, it should be set to, your render global should be set to 720 by 1280, HD 720 here. But we don't want to check our animation at that large of a video, of a resolution. So you can just bring the scale down to about half, and then we'll play blast it.
Everyone sign? Yes. Good. On we go.
Okay, so that's just checking. So at this point, we would look at this play blast, and we would really think about all the poses that we have put in, the timing, how fast things move from pose to pose, and we really want to refine that and get that working as well as possible before we actually start refining anything. You really want to try and lock down all the poses and the speed at which he moves from one pose to the next, and then start refining. As we've done in all the other previous classes, select the entire character again, and then leave the first and last key out, but shift select over all the keys in the middle. Once you're happy with the blocking, that is, do this. Go to tangents and spline. Or you can also go into the graph editor. You can select everything but the first and last keys. Just make sure you have everything selected. And then you can just hit the spline button. Once you've done that, I would play blast it again and see how things are working. Your holds are going to move a little bit. Sometimes it works out really well. Sometimes you get the head nodding back and forth and other little things, but you can just go into the graph editor. You can just calm the curves down by just making them a little more flat, just so your moving hold moves a little less. Alright, so one last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about before I leave you to it is don't be afraid to break tangents. So say for example we have this anticipation and we're going into our final major pose, but you want to drag the head a little bit. So say we're scrubbing over and you want to actually drag the head a little bit at this point. Don't be afraid to grab the head control, get your rotate in the graph editor. If you want to drag it back a little bit like this, but you don't want to set in another key, and I suggest you do this. I don't suggest you would set another key for this because it just clutters your timeline up with keyframes. A better approach would be to actually break the tangents on these rotations. You can do one at a time, one or two or all three. I'll just do all three right now. Just select all these keyframes, and I got my time marker on right on the spot where I want to have a little bit of a drag on the head, and we can go to the break tangents. And now I'll just do one at a time. Just go to the X, grab one side of it, and I can see my time markers here, right at the place where I want to see the effect of the dragging. And just go ahead and break those keys and just move them to where you need them. Just bend the spline handle. It comes in really handy in some places. So if you did something like that, you might go to the keyframe next to it and just bend those curves. And you can see the result in the camera view. Once you have your blocking done, before you actually start refining, feel free to send us your blocking. We would like to see your blocking. We'll send you some feedback before you actually start refining your work.